Good evening and welcome to KTN News' KTN Weekend Prime from wherever you're watching us in the East African region. Glad you could join us. We've got a packed bulletin for you, including mileage claims by Kenyan MPs that will give you the shocks. 1.7 million shillings claimed by one MP in 1 month. We've also got a new segment this evening. It's called 5 Things You Need to Know. And this week, we're talking about 5 things you need to know about emergency medical treatment. That, of course, in the wake of the death of Alex Madaga earlier on last week. We've also got an interview with IPOA member of the IPOA board, Vincent Kipto, about amendments to the IPOA Act that could make the president the person that hires and fires members and the chairman of the Independent Policing Oversight Authority. So lots to get through this evening. Stay with us here on KTN Weekend Prime. Right now though, let's get into the highlights. Not so honorable. Could MPs be stealing billions on dubious mileage claims?
Tumepitia jambo ngumu na kwa kweli ni jambo zito.
We did not bury our daughter. Body swap after months of agonizing wait.
Some of the witnesses were ferried from Harambe House in a government Land Rover to Nakuru CID headquarters to record statements on post-election violence in February 2008.
New twist in the Ruto ICC case. Human rights activists.
Today I use this phone and I type an SMS with this hand.
And who said disability is inability? An IT specialist operating in his own league. Glad you could join us once again here on KTN News. Our sign language interpreter is Meresha Awiti. We begin our coverage in Parliament with some disturbing revelations that your Member of Parliament, your Kenyan Member of Parliament, could be siphoning millions of shillings in mileage claims despite the country's financial crisis. More than 1 billion shillings is lost to paying MPs mileage claims to some who do not necessarily visit their constituencies before making these claims. Payments seen by KTN News indicate those coming from far-flung areas reap the biggest from the mileage allowance in tunes of nearly 2 million shillings a month. Sam Ogina with that report.
That Parliament has become an exclusive members club to mint millions of shillings through dubious claims is now in focus, with a lot of privileges from sitting allowances to mileage claims to cement MPs' salaries. It has emerged a number of parliamentarians are using mileage allowance to mint big bucks using fake work tickets. A compilation of the claims by MPs for last month seen by KTN creates doubt on the amounts payable. Mandera East MP Abdiaziz Ali Farah was the highest paid member of parliament, earning 1.7 million shillings in mileage allowance alone. Entitled to claim mileage allowance over and above 750 kilometers traveled at a rate of 187 shillings per kilometer. Translation: the parliamentarian covered nearly 10,000 kilometers within that month. Given the distance, for example, between Busia and Mombasa is 795 kilometers, 1.7 million shillings is an equivalent of 12 trips from Busia to Mombasa. Others are Turkana Central MP John Nakara, who earned 1.69 million shillings mileage allowance, Lamu West MP Ali Sharif, earning 1.3 million shillings, and peculiarly, Tongaren parliamentarian Eseli Simiyu, who received 1.2 million shillings in mileage reimbursement. The distance between Nairobi and his constituency being approximately 450 kilometers, meaning 1.2 million to Tongaren constituency. Members of Parliament travel 4 times a month to their constituencies from Friday to Monday. The rest of the days of the week are spent in Nairobi. But there are concerns that even without traveling to their representative areas, some MPs still apply for mileage claims. A section of MPs drawn from Nairobi and central regions petitioned the Salaries and Remuneration Commission to abolish mileage claims by their colleagues. The lawmakers claimed most of their colleagues were abusing the privilege, as some sought reimbursement even when they had not traveled to their constituencies. Some of the MPs, especially those whose constituencies are far from Nairobi, have been pocketing more than 2 million shillings monthly through a blatant abuse of the privilege. Samugina, KTN News.
Profligate spending in times of austerity are members of parliament there. Let's move on, where the body of a female student killed during the Garissa terrorist attack has been exhumed in Kitui after it emerged that it had been handed to the wrong family. The legitimate body of their daughter, which has been lying at the Chiromo mortuary for over 4 months, was buried shortly after the exhumation exercise. But as KTN's Muremi Mwangi now reports, the exhumation exercise only marks the long wait for the second family that now has to wait for the DNA results to establish that the body exhumed is indeed their daughter.
Rekindling grief right on the grave of a soul whose 4 months stay here has to be suddenly cut short, apparently because the right occupant of the space, who had been kept waiting in the mortuary for 4 months, has finally arrived. For the better part of Saturday, Itivanzo village in Mwingi, Kitui County was engulfed in fresh grief as 2 families whose daughters were brutally murdered during the Garissa terrorist attack met on this grave. The exercise ahead to dig up this grave and retrieve the body of 23-year-old Rispa Kasioka after it emerged that the body had been handed to the wrong family following a mix-up of the body's DNA results with those of another victim, also from Kitui, by the name Philomena Kasioka.
This was a very painful experience, especially to both families. And even after when we were thinking that we have buried our own, it turned out that it's not our own. And to do a repeat, it was a very painful experience.
Daktari ama wale waliohusika wangehakikisha kuwa mwili ni wa nani. Sisi hatuwezi kukosoa ni nani. Sisi sote wazazi tumepitia jambo ngumu, na kwa kweli ni jambo zito, na si mapenzi yetu hilo jambo litendeke, lakini Mungu atupe kusamili kwa haya yote tumepitia.
Today's exercise marked the end of 4 months of agony for Rispa's family, which has been searching everywhere for her body since the terrorist struck, while Philomena's body, which should have been buried here, collected for the 4 months.
Wale waliofanya kicho kitendo tunawalaani, hatuwaonee huruma kwa kuwa wamefanya vibaya, kwa hiyo hatuna huruma na wao. Serikali ichukue hatua kulinda wananchi. Tumeumia, tumeteseka kiroho, tumeteseka kimawazo, lakini Mungu atatupa kustamili hayo yote.
In our Kamba tradition, such a thing has never happened, at least to my knowledge. Could have happened, but to my knowledge, we have never had to dig up a grave and replace bodies.
Earlier this year, the court had issued an order for the exhumation of the body, but this family opposed the exercise, demanding for their daughter's body, and on this day, the exhumation exercise only commenced after the arrival of the body from the Chiromo mortuary.
I'm praying that the body that will be exhumed here will turn out to be Rispa's. Otherwise, it will actually be another process that which will be more painful to me than any other thing in this world.
But as Philomena's family heaved a sigh of relief that they had finally buried their daughter, the exhumation exercise only marked the commencement of a long wait for Rispa's family, which now has to await the DNA results to establish that the body exhumed here today is indeed that of their daughter.
Wale watoto wazazi wako na huzuni sana kwa siku zile zote wamepoteza mtoto na bado waona uhakika kuwa ni mtoto wao.
A sad event, but one which marks a sigh of relief for the 2 families. But as the burial gets underway, the challenge now is up to the government to better security and fight terror to prevent such sad incidents through which Kenyans continue losing young lives. Muremi Mwangi, KTN News in Kitui.
Now, where a true definition of a hasty retreat cannot be anything better than what a renowned human rights activist just portrayed. Ken Wafula of the Center for Human Rights and Democracy now wants the International Criminal Court to drop the case against Deputy President William Ruto. Wafula, who has been vocal and an ardent supporter of the ICC process, says the whole drama involving witness coaching and fixing allegations will not result in true justice for the victims. Nicholas Wambua reports.
The Eldoret-based human rights activist has not only surprised many, but his testimony early Saturday may be considered one of the last blows to the ICC prosecution side as they await ruling on whether Deputy President William Ruto and journalist Joshua Arap Sang have a case to answer in the ICC.
And I want to state that while the ICC court should drop charges against the DB and the Deputy President and Sang, the ICC should move fast and prefer charges against the then State House and Harambee House operatives who procured the state witnesses for committing crimes against administration of justice.
Ken Wafula, who has been vocal and ardent supporter of the ICC cases, took a surprising haste in support of dropping the Ruto case, just a few months after hitting the headlines with the purported Mesha Kebe case, in which he alleged that Kebe had been murdered in order not to testify in the Ruto case. Today, he is reading from a totally different script.
The International Criminal Court has no moral authority to proceed with these cases. If it can be proved beyond reasonable doubt that Korea's allegations actually confirms what they did, behind the scenes, behind all of us, then it will be wrong, it will be unjust, it will be dishonest, it will be insincere to proceed with that case to its conclusion.
Wafula added that his decision to withdraw his support from ICC cases has been informed ahead and recorded a statement with the CID and ICC investigators saying that this has reinforced his facts. He admits to have been a key pillar and a supporter of ICC cases and was at the forefront in the protection of ICC witnesses whose names leaked from the WAKI and Kenya National Commission of Human Rights KNCHR reports.
That some of the witnesses were ferried from Harambee House in a government Land Rover to Nakuru CID headquarters to record statements on post-election violence in February 2008. And this further gives credit to Korea's allegation.
Elsewhere, Majority Leader Adan Duale wants the court to end the cases against the two in the basis that the court can't be using recanted evidence. This is after the ICC judge Chile Ebo Osoji issued a warning to Kenya politicians against making demeaning sentiments against the court.
Abusive commentaries have been directed at the court, of course in an apparent hope of bullying judges into the groove of these sentiments. Clamor in the media will remain wholly without effect in the outcome of the case.
Kama mashahidi wametoroka, wametoroka. Sasa wewe hata hapa Kenya isili na polisi hapa. Saa hii mtu kupiga isili, uende polisi. Kama ushahidi hajakuja, utahukumiwa. Utahukumiwa. Tunaambia Osuji, we respect the court, but you must and we will not allow recanted evidence.
Nicholas Wambua, Weekend Prime, KTN News.
Let's go to Tanzania now. And after serving two five-year terms, President Jakaya Kikwete exits active politics after this year's general election. That's next week in Tanzania. And as KTN's Francis Ontomwa now reports, Tanzanians have mixed reactions on Kikwete's terms, which end at the end of this month.
In the next few days, the curtain will be falling on Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete's reign as Tanzania president. Kikwete took over the instruments of power from the third president, Benjamin William Mkapa, a man who had set the bar pretty high, in a good place when his 2 terms ended in 2005. Kikwete has been described as being a laid-back yet steadfast head of state an economist by profession. Kikwete's style of leadership has been seen to trace almost a similar track to that of his predecessors, pillared on the pretext of national unity. But even with anxiety hanging on this year's tightly contested presidential race, what will history remember him about?
Nitakumbuka mengi alifanya Jakaya tangu alipoingia mwaka 2005 kutuletea kwanza shule za kata au zifanya watu wengi hata wale ambao walikuwa wanaweza kwenda shule wamejitahidi kwenda shule kwa sababu ada ilikuwa kidogo ni ndogo.
Mimi naweza nikasema kwamba ameokoa vijana kuleta hii tiba ya Macedon.
The former African Union chairperson is highly credited for knitting the national fabric of Tanzania, with the country still retaining its reputation as one of the region's most politically stable countries. Veteran journalist and media consultant Felix Makiembe has penned his way through different regimes, and for him, leaving the country unified is what will largely play his legacy.
Leo watu hawezi wakajua kwamba mtu ulimfanyia akajua kwamba umemfanyia jema, lakini utakapoondoka atakapoliona ile gap ndio atakapokukumbuka. Kwa hiyo na yeye tutakuja kumkumbuka tu kwa sababu kuna vitu vitakavyotupa reference. Amesema Akiba bwana alifanya hiki.
Economically, analysts agree that his focus on infrastructure, provision of services coupled by the laying of foreign direct investment frameworks played a key role in keeping Tanzania afloat.
Amefanya mengi tu makubwa katika kupanua uchumi wa nchi.
Under his leadership, both the health and education sector received a boost, with major hospitals equipped and more health practitioners posted, even to health centers in remote parts of the country. Worryingly, however, cities which they say have persistently stuck in a rut.
Hospitali ndio ikawepo, lakini madawa yakawa ya shida. Manesi wenyewe sometime hospitali nzima ukakuta manesi 3.
Mjamzito anapopeleka hospitali lazima uhudumiwe vizuri. Unaona? Sasa unakuta kama hauna pesa watakupita tu manesi.
On the vexing problem of youth unemployment, Kikwete walks away head down. The 5,000 jobs a year promised to use that widely featured on his campaign pledges is yet to be realized, as many youth still remain jobless. The rate of unemployment still stands at over 10%.
Kwa sasa hivi yani kwanza vijana hawana ajira. Yani sasa hivi wanaokota makopo, ndugu zangu hapa, yani kama sio wamama, sio vijana, sio wazee, wanahitaji yani wakipita barabarani wanaokota makopo. Kwa kweli kazi sasa hivi ni ngumu, tunahitaji mabadiliko.
Kikwete's legacy cannot be exhaustively discussed without the mentioning of the country's first lady, Salma Kikwete. She is perhaps the most visible first lady in the country's history, the founder of the Wanawake na Maendeleo initiative that has promoted development among women and children, besides leading several campaigns on reproductive health.
Nchi yetu imekuwa ndio chemchem na kisima cha amani.
Mzee Kingunge Ngombale Mwiru, a founding member of both TANU and CCM parties, has served as the presidential advisor to both Mkapa and Kikwete, who better to pass judgment on Tanzania's last 10 years.
Ndugu Benjamin Mkapa, rais wa awamu ya pili, alipokea leadership, uongozi, wakati uchumi unakuwa kwa 4%. Akasukuma mpaka tukafika ukuaji wa uchumi wa 7%, ambao ni nzuri sana. Huo mwaka 2005. Leo uchumi wetu unakuwa kwa asilimia ngapi? Juzi gazeti linasema unakuwa kwa chini kidogo ya 7%. Kwa hiyo miaka 10 hii tumeganda.
As the clock ticks to the end of Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete's 10-year presidency, the country as politically stable as he found it. But to some critics, they point to a long list of aspirations that ended in frustrations. Francis Ontomwa, KTN News, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
Lots to talk about and lots to look forward to next week, October the 25th, in that transition in Tanzania. It's going down to the wire between Chadema's Edward Lowassa and CCM's John Magufuli. KTN is on the ground and will be on the ground until the last vote is counted and a new president of Tanzania is announced. So stay here with us on KTN News. Let's move on. Now, do the disabled have a place in the corporate world? And if so, can they excel in careers that require them to use that which they lack? The answer is yes. And KTN met with Godfrey Epalei, a man who was born with no hands but is now an author, an IT expert and a lecturer at the KWS College in Naivasha town. Fatma Paula now tells us the story of his extraordinary life and his recipe for success.
50-year-old Godfrey Epalei, an IT expert and a lecturer, appears unbothered. He was born with these two stamps where his hands should have been.
Starting with 10 $10 and mine is only one.
But that has never stopped him from pursuing his dream career. He is now an information technology specialist, and for now, he is passing the same knowledge to the younger generation. As he goes about his business, you can feel his passion from across the room, and the speed with which he types is nothing short of impressive. But that is not the only activity he has mastered. Away from the classroom, on the road, he operates his car with ease, and maybe he is a better car operator than most able-bodied drivers. Over the years, Epalei has mastered the art of making lemonade out of all lemons that life has thrown his way.
My age of going to school has reached, and I was not going to school, and I wanted to go to school with my elder brother. So they were wondering, hey, how did this guy go to school? Because I couldn't write. But slowly by slowly, I've learned all the challenges, and I learned how to write, and now I write very well, and therefore I went to school, class 1 up to Prince Primary, went to secondary, and went to the University of Nairobi.
Watching how he struggles with some practicalities of everyday living, like wearing his socks, and the keenness with which he does them is an indication that nothing in his life is taken for granted. But even those that might appear as a task, he does with absolute ease. But to get to this point, he had to overcome challenges. Chasing after his dream, he says, was not always an easy ride.
When I write an application, people will see the papers, then they'll invite me for interview. When you enter the interview hall, everybody's face changes. One does this papers and this person how? Because 1, I am disabled. 2, I am looking for a computer job. So they'll ask you questions very guarded. But now at the end, I ask them, maybe you're wondering, how do I write? How do I use a computer? Then now they start coming up and they say, how do you write? Then I show them how I write.
But confident, he had to learn at an early age that he was different. So he made up his own different way of doing things.
When I go to a restaurant, everybody looks at me. The waiter wonders whether to serve me or not. Now the young kids, when they see me, they start running and saying, hey, look at this person, has no hands, has no hands. Now, I have learned that if you tell them, go away, they'll now make it worse for you. They tell you, Panda, what can you do?
But as he got older, the challenges got more complicated, he says. Many a times he had to remind himself that there was a reason he was born this way.
Even when I was buying a phone like this one, it was a challenge because I didn't know how to use it. Let me tell this person not to call me. Hello?
It is with this positive light that he has lived most of his life. Today, he boasts of many achievements. An author of 2 books and an IT expert, both of which he has achieved using these same hands that many have doubted. Fatma Pole, KTN News.
Now, in the wake of the death of Alex Madaga, the name that I'm sure you know, the man who died after spending 18 hours in an ambulance last week, many questions are being asked by Kenyans across the country about each Kenyan's entitlement to emergency medical treatment. Now, on our new segment this week, 5 things you need to know, we're tackling just that. So let's get into it. Tonight we're joined from our I&M studios by Tabitha Saonyo Griffith, from the acting deputy director from the Kenya Ethical and Legal Network here in Nairobi. Thank you very much for joining us, Tabitha. 5 things that we need to know about emergency medical treatment. Perhaps I'll start with the first one before we even go to number 1, is that it's in our Bill of Rights, Article 43(1). Every Kenyan has a right to emergency medical treatment. But first, let's get into the first one that we need to know about this. Number 1, emergency medical treatment is not a preserve of public hospitals. All facilities are bound to provide it. Tabitha, how little do we know about this as Kenyans?
Thank you, Alan. The truth and the reality of the matter, sadly, is that many Kenyans, especially the ones who need this information most, do not know that. They are not aware of their constitutional rights, and they're not aware of the fact that private facilities are bound to provide emergency medical treatment equal to public health facilities.
Well, Tabitha, we saw last week with Coptic Hospital apparently turning Alex Madaga away, and Coptic Hospital is not a public hospital. What can the family do? What can do? What recourse does Alex's family have in this case?
Well, the great thing is that the right to emergency medical treatment is enshrined in the Constitution, and that makes it a right that you can actually go to court and ask the court to give you remedies for. So Alex's family has several interventions. I believe that the public is aware of the fact that the Kenya Medical Practitioners and Dentists Board already held a preliminary inquiry yesterday, and they've now moved on and said that Kenyatta National Hospital and Coptic have a case to answer, and their cases are going to be within the next 21 days. So that's the first step for the family. The second step for the family is, of course, now to ask the courts, go to the courts if they find that they still want an interpretation of what Article 43(2) really means. And that means that for them they can go and seek punitive damages against the hospitals that are held liable.
All right, that I think brings us very nicely into number 2 of the 5 things that you need to know this evening, is that the health bill guarantees the right to emergency medical treatment, prescribing punishment for violation. But this is a health bill, not an act yet, hasn't been passed. So what substantive law can someone use to claim the right under the Constitution, Tabitha?
Well, as much as the bill, as you rightly put it, is still a bill, we then go back to the Constitution, which is the apex of the law, and where it is the source, the very source of the law. And if you look at it does not need any further interpretation. What the health bill does is merely come in and say that every person is entitled to emergency medical treatment. Where a private facility or public facility denies a person this emergency medical services, then they're liable in law and therefore prescribes a punishment for it. But that does not mean that simply because we don't have a bill that gives life to Article 43(2) that we cannot go to court. Article 43(2) in itself allows you to go to court and ask the court to declare that there was a violation of your right. So we still have a lot of laws in place.
Okay, let's go into number 3, the Constitution, health policy, the Kenya health policy and vision.
to give life to all these aspects of health, including emergency medical treatment. So what we need actually is just to give life to Article 43 in itself and say, let's have a health bill that defines the standards, sets the punishments for those who violate the law, because the Constitution doesn't do that.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, let's move now to some figures here that that perhaps show how serious the situation is with respect to emergency medical treatment. Number 4, Kenyatta Hospital has 21 ICU beds, whereas the WHO recommends 63 beds. KNH is the hospital of choice for all ICU cases in Kenya. Serious situation just from the numbers, but what can Kenya do right now, especially with health being a devolved function in this country?
Well, there are several things that the government can do. We must remember that the obligation of the government is to promote, protect, and fulfill its obligations, as well as the obligations that it has under the ratified instruments that it has in the international scenario. Number 1, we need to ensure that at the county level, are we able to compel our counties to have at least a minimum of 3 ICU beds in each county? Number 2, do we have trauma centers in Kenya? No, we do not have any. And within the county setting, our priority, sadly, if you look at the statistics for the last few years post-devolution, has been to buy ambulances rather than to equip the hospitals that we have, such that we stop doing the referrals to Kenyatta.
Yeah.
The sad reality is that we're still doing referrals because our hospitals at the county level are not equipped in terms of the facilities they need and also in terms of the personnel they need. And that is why the referral keeps happening.
And I believe this was in a Jubilee manifesto that there'd be more referral hospitals and upgrading of referral hospitals across, of hospitals to referral status across the country. That hasn't happened yet, fairly serious, which leads us to number 5, something that you mentioned. Kenya has no specialized trauma center. What does this make for the enforcement of the right to emergency medical treatment, both in private hospitals or in public hospitals, Tabitha?
Ideally, as I said, a trauma center would be able to respond better to issues, particularly of disasters. Alan, we must remind ourselves that disasters are inevitable. Be it through terrorism, which as a country, Kenya, we must acknowledge that we're facing, be it through road accidents, which are not preventable in most instances, or be it through any natural disaster that may happen. The sad reality is that as a country, we have not invested enough in emergency medical treatment as a component of health. Therefore, we do not have the required number of nurses who are supposed to have at least specialized information when it comes to emergency treatment. We do not have the right number of neurosurgeons who can be able to cater for emergency medical situations if they occur. A trauma center and a well-built trauma center would be able to at least have the facilities themselves in terms of the ICU and HDU facilities, as well as probably also have the personnel, the nurses, the doctors, who have a greater understanding other than the just general understanding that a doctor has.
All right, Tabitha Saonyo Griffiths, the acting deputy. Thank you very much for joining us this evening on 5 things you need to know about emergency medical treatment. Hopefully now Kenyans are more up to date with the kind of information that they need to be able to claim that very important right, and hopefully a situation that took place last week with the death of Alex Madaga does not replay itself in this country. Thank you very much for joining us, Tabitha. Welcome back to KTN Weekend Prime. This is The Other Kenya, and on The Other Kenya tonight we're discussing amendments to the Statute Laws Miscellaneous Amendment Bill 2015 that could have far-reaching effects in the structure of the National Police Service and the Independent Policing Oversight Authority, especially that authority, the Independent Policing Oversight Authority. According to some in India, in IPOA, you might as well just strike off the I and just call it the Policing Oversight Authority after this amendment. Of course, my guest this evening is Vincent Kiptoa, member of the Independent Policing Oversight Authority Commission. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Now let's get straight into the problems that you have with this statute laws amendment bill 2015, specific to the Independent Policing Oversight Authority Act. We don't have it on graphic, but I'll read an abridged version of the amendment. A chairperson or member of the board can be removed by the president, not by the Public Service Commission, which is what is currently the law. And the removal process of the chair or a member had a number of prerequisites, and the Public Service Commission was supposed to handle all of these. All of those have been struck off. Tell me, apart from the obvious, what problems do you see here?
The key thing with these amendments are that it goes into the independence of the authority. In fact, to a large extent, if we were to make such an amendment, then it would better be we remove the whole idea about independence. The whole idea about independence of institutions is premised on the fact that the governors or the people who are tasked to manage that institution must first have the necessary powers. They should also have security of tenure. The other thing is that this institution should have the necessary resources and all the necessary institutional arrangements, including the law, to ensure that they are independent. Now, this amendment targets that security of tenure, and it actually takes away the independence and gives it to the whims of the president. So our greatest challenge, and which I think we are asking the public, members of the public, members of parliament, is that they need to restore back, to take back what the executive wants to take.
All right, security of tenure may be one thing, but experience, especially specific to policing in this country, is something that has caused quite a Ministry of the Interior and the National Police Service, pointing at the IPOA as having members of that commission that don't have requisite experience in policing. Your background isn't in policing. The chairman's background isn't in policing, and a number of other people do not have that background. So how then can you give oversight to the police?
Yes, I think the way the Independent Policing Oversight Authority was set up meant that those members who are supposed to be the commissioners or the board members have certain experiences which enhance the whole process of policing. The National Police Service Commission is largely a police background institution. It's an institution where you need a wealth of experience in the police. To a large extent, you can say it's an appendage of the police. The whole idea about policing oversight depends on the fact that it is the civilians. The civilians who are supposed to be policed, the civilians who have a social contract with the government need to have power to ensure that they are governed in a manner that meets the standards of the constitution, it meets the human rights standards, and it protects the entrusted power. Let me say that the power the police exercise is not ordinarily power which they have by right. It's power bestowed onto them by civilians. So the whole idea about civilian oversight is to ensure that civilians have a role in how they are policed.
Critics would mention the fact that we're in a very unique situation right now as a country. We're facing the existential threat of terrorism and other threats to our security, to civilian security, that perhaps civilians do not have the requisite knowledge or understanding to deal with in terms of oversight at a time like this. Special circumstances requiring special experience from the police. So I'll just go back to that question again. Given the circumstances that we're in as a country, do you still think that there's a need for civilian oversight?
There is still a very big need, and I don't want to look at the experience. The board members of IPOA have a lot of experience in policing. Personally, I have a background in the Anti-Corruption Commission for the last 12 years. Part of that time, I spent about 3 years in the Anti-Corruption Police Unit. The other members have experience in human rights. The chairman has a wide span experience. In fact, he was part of the team that looked at policing the way policing can be improved, and there is a lot of work which was done by the Ransley. If you've heard of the Ransley report.
Yes.
So besides that, policing has actually conceived initially was that policing is about the people.
Yes, but in these extraordinary times when we are facing terrorism, terrorist threats, perhaps the executive and other members of the government would want less encumbrances to be able to deal with terrorism as they see fit, whether or not this affects human rights of the public.
Yeah. No, the independent policing oversight is very much alive, and in fact we have a lot of capacity, and we understand the circumstances. We understand the roles the police are playing, and the police are doing a commendable job. The only thing is that the police are not necessarily licensed to infringe on people's human rights.
Yeah.
Whatever the situation, and world over, the police have the necessary machinery. The laws, even in Kenya, are sufficient enough to ensure that the police are able to counter terrorism, and they are able to counter all the other crimes. To a large extent, in this country, we have there are many other crimes, which are more of a challenge than even terrorism. But terrorism, of course, is the current thing.
Yes,
it is the argument
because of the nature of the
the nature of it, because of the public attention it brings. But there are deep, serious crimes. There is so much crime. For example, in the drug dealing. There's a lot of human trafficking. All those are risks which the country are facing, which have a more serious consequence, and they have a relationship with terrorism.
And a bearing on the mandate of the Independent Policing Oversight Authority. Let's go back to those amendments, removing the Public Service Commission from the role of removal of commissioners, members, chairman. What do you think is motivating this?
In fact, it's not just the public service that plays a role. There is the National Assembly, which is involved in the process of recruitment. Then there is the role, of course, the president plays. The risk it has is that the president can wake up today, and if he doesn't feel very well, or if he doesn't feel well predisposed, he can decide he doesn't need the chairman.
Yeah.
And by that stroke of pen, you will find that he can change the whole board of the Independent Policing Oversight.
Recentralizing of power, it would seem. There's also amendments in the same statute laws, miscellaneous amendments bill, that affect the National Police Service itself, and perhaps we saw a prelude to this with the removal of Grace Kaindi. Section 17, the President may remove or retire or redeploy a Deputy IG at any time before the IG attains the age of retirement. The same is repeated for the Director of Criminal Investigations in Section 31. How come we're not hearing enough about this from IPOA? Because this also interferes with the independence of those officers serving at the top echelons of the police service.
The police, to a large extent, are part of the executive. In fact, besides serving the public, they're supposed to implement. They're supposed to effect. They are actually supposed to contribute directly to the implementation of the manifesto of the party in power.
Yes.
Now, to that extent, there is a closer relationship with the executive, unlike IPOA, because IPOA has a closer relationship to the public. That IPOA also protects the police. It investigates complaints against the police, and to a large extent, but to a large extent, it's a civilian agency.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to implementing the manifesto and taking the responsibility the president has for members of this country, then he probably needs some discretion. Now, that discretion should be within a context of security, because the people who are the IG or the deputy IG or even the director criminal investigation, ordinarily they are supposed to be professional to some level.
Yeah.
So the law should give them some level of some leverage where they're able to act independently. Now, their interferes with that independence.
Yes.
And we are not necessarily very comfortable with that as IPOA.
But the relationship is being closer with the executive. It is not something that you'll fight too hard over. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for this evening, Mr. Vincent Kipto. Thank you very much for joining us on KTN Weekend Prime, the other Kenya. Loads that we could talk about, including the sacking of 63 officers. In fact, I just want to ask you that, good or bad, considering the widespread crime that we've seen, good or bad?
No, it's good. It's positive.
All right.
Positive for this country. I think that is what the National Police Service has done, which we are happy with.
All right. Unfortunately, that's where we're going to have to end it. Thank you very much for joining us nonetheless on The Other Kenya this evening. Of course, you've heard what kind of amendments are being proposed in the National Assembly to change the nature of the firing, or rather the process of firing or letting go of the chairman or a member of the Independent Policing Oversight Authority, interfering directly with that independent mandate of the IPOA, according to members of the IPOA. Take a look at that law and get your views heard with respect to that. KTN Weekend Prime continues in a moment. We've got lots more news, so don't go too far, including sports news, lots of development, especially from the quarterfinals of the Rugby World Cup. Stay with us. Where Guinean leader Alpha Condé has been re-elected for the second term in the first round of the country's presidential election. The provisional results released by the Electoral Commission showed an outright majority with close to 2.2 million votes. Meanwhile, the opposition has said it is pulling out of the contest, claiming that the Sunday vote was marred by widespread fraud and mismanagement. Preliminary results from the vast majority of the ballots cast show Condé ahead of his main rival, Selou Dalien Diallo, with the 6 other candidates trailing. It's not immediately clear what Diallo's withdrawal means if the election would go to a second round runoff, but that doesn't seem likely at this stage. Alright, yet more revelations coming out of the National Youth Service, this time from the Standard on Sunday. Just like last week, yet more to look into. And there's a headline, a tale of 3 firms, 1 director and 791 million shillings. The shadowy directors that were able to withdraw a lot of money prior to this scandal being touched off by a denial from the Devolution Ministry that this money had ever left, to an admission a few weeks later that this money had gone, touching off a political storm, but more so forensic. The 34th edition of the Impala Floodlit Rugby Tournament kicked off today at the Impala Stadium, and in the first quarter-final match, Homeboys defeated Total Nondis by 29-13 in a match that saw Homeboys player Kelvin Masai starring. Impala thrashed Kenya Harlequins 48-17 in the second quarter-final match. The tournament will continue till the 31st of October. Still on rugby, hundreds of rugby lovers assembled at the Kisii Stadium during the second edition of the Kisii Sevens, sponsored by the Nairobian newspaper, a publication of the Standard Group Limited, and Resolution Health. And in the preliminaries, 47-0 before handing Kisii veterans a 12-5 beating to sail to the quarterfinals. Masaku RFC scored an impressive 34-0 win against Strathmore, while Impala defeated Young Turks 26-7 before drawing 12-all points with Homeboys. In other matches, Kisii Rugby Club lost 7-12 to Young Turks before hammering Masinde Muliro University 12-7, actually quite a close contest there, while Impala beat Homeboys 7-17. Clephas Ngetich and Volari Jameli are the winners of the senior races at the 25th edition of the University of Eldoret cross-country meeting. And still on the matter of the track, John Wangangi, the 2012 World Half Record Marathon bronze medalist, won the 21-kilometer senior men's race during the Madoka Half Marathon held in Taita Taveta County.
John Mwangangi, the 2012 World Half Marathon bronze medalist, is the winner of this year's edition of the Senior Men's Madoka Half Marathon held at Taita Taveta County. Mwangangi clocked 1 minute 0.6 seconds, coming in fast ahead of Nicholas Kipkemoi and Hosea Mok in the second and third position respectively.
Na nikasema sababu najua hii course mpaka hii mwaka nikuje ning'ang'ane, at least iko karibu na kwetu, nione kama naweza fanya mzuri, sababu na prepare kuenda kukimbia marathon next month tarehe 15 huko Spain.
In the men's junior race, Martin Shome came in first, Robert Mwakio was second, while Samoei Mwangoi came in third. When Frida Moseti won the 21 kilometers senior women's race at a time of 1 hour, 8.23 seconds. She was followed closely by Lucy Cheriotat, who clocked 1 hour 19 minutes 23 seconds. Eunice Kioko came in third. In the women's 10 kilometers junior race, Janet Kuria came in first, followed by Agatha Wakesho and Martha Wanjiku. And still on the matters of the track, Cleophas Ngetich and Valerie Jelmeli won the senior races of the 25th edition of the University of Eldoret Cross Country. It was a particularly sweet victory for US-based Cleophas Ngetich, who is fresh from winning the Tennessee's cross country. Ngetich clocked 29 minutes, 38.30 seconds. In the women's 8 kilometers race, Valerie Jameli, a marathon specialist, won the senior women's race in 27 minutes, 18.4 seconds. Judith Kian came in second, while Lina Jeruto was third.
27-year-old Samuel Kiru of Kenya Riders is the day one leader of the second edition of the Tour de Machakos. Samuel Kiru clocked 9 hours, 38 minutes and 27 seconds to win the 50-kilometer cycling race, while Suleiman Kangangi came in second, clocking 9 hours, 38 minutes and 39 seconds. And Josphat Gedambo third with 9 hours, 38 minutes and 40 seconds. In the women's category, Joyce Nyaruri from Western Kenya clocked 10 hours flat with 38 seconds to secure a position 1 after coming in at position 57 in the 50-kilometer cycling race. The 4-day competition continues tomorrow, whereby the race will take place in Machakos to Kenol along the Machakos-Kangundo Road. It's here on KTN Weekend Prime. Thank you very much for your feedback on 5 things you need to know about emergency medical treatment. Next Saturday, we rode on with another topic from the current affairs news agenda that you need to know. Of course, thank you also for your feedback on that IPOR interview on the other Kenya. I'm seeing some feedback from the Rugby World Cup. Mohamed Ali Mohaji Chopevu saying the Springboks are Springboks. No, it's Springboks, not Springbooks. Springboks are a rugby team currently in very serious winning form. And a book, of course, is what you call it, a book. So, Rugby IQ, Moha. We'll see you tomorrow on Checkpoint. My name is John Allen Amu. Have a great evening.